Who co-wrote this thing again?
Come on!
Oh, there's a river that winds on forever. I'm gonna see where it leads. Oh, there's a mountain that no man has mounted. I'm gonna stand on a peak. Out there's a land that time don't command. Wanna be the first to arrive. No time for pondering why I'm wandering on while we both sit back. To the ends of the earth, would you follow me? There's a world that was meant for us to see. To the ends of the earth, would you follow me?
Thank you for being here. It really means a lot.
It's our pleasure. I mean, it's not a pleasant time.
No, we're just very sorry.
We're very sorry.
I'm tired of life being all about ailments and funerals. I want to push myself.
You want to hike the Appalachian Trail?
2,000 miles. You have gone mad.
It's my old pup tent.
It's the perfect place for you to spend the night.
2,000 people a year try to do this. Less than 10% make it. Fit people in their 20s can't do it, Dad.
You'll need a rain cover, too. Rain cover? Why? To keep out the rain.
You are not doing this alone.
How would you like to join me for a little stroll?
Not in this lifetime.
Next time, call me for something fun, like a colonoscopy.
Bryson, it's Katz.
Stephen?
Not Stephen Katz. You two ended up on each other's nerves in Europe.
That was 40 years ago.
I gotta eat every hour, otherwise I get these,
Seizures?
seizures. That's right.
Good luck. Try not to die, okay?
We go?
We go. What goes up must come down. What the hell happened to Dom?
John Muir once said, sometimes a man just has to get a loaf of bread and throw it into a sack and jump over the back fence.
You okay?
Never better.
You guys camping here?
No, we live here.
How can I help you?
We like a cabin?
You know what your problem is? You're too fat.
Look at this. We're not even halfway there.
No way that's to scale.
Map to scale. That's it. New plan.
You want to drive the Appalachian Trail?
I came out here to be with you. One last adventure before it's too late.
You can do whatever you want, but this is my adventure.
Fine.
That's the spirit.
This is not like yesterday.
Kathy seems great, but one woman all these years,
Well,
that can't be good for you.
you know, I'm sorry we lost touch.
And me too.
Jesus, if they come for us, play dead.
F theirs. If they come for us, we are dead.
Well, they say the Appalachian Trail's like life. You don't know what's going to happen next, but you give it your best shot.
Hello there. Richard the Film Geek here. And I'm here to give you guys my review of the 2015 semi-autobiographical American dramedy film A Walk in the Woods, which was loosely, emphasis on loosely, adapted from the best-selling 1998 Bill Bryson travel book of the same name by co-producer Bill Haldeman and Michael Lont, who previously worked on the screenplays to Little Miss Sunshine, Toy Story 3, and Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, was originally going to be directed directed by either Larry Charles, Chris Columbus, or Barry Levinson, but instead ultimately ended up in the televisual hands of Ken Kwapis, who previously helmed Sesame Street Presents Follow That Bird, The Sisterhood of the Travelling Pants, and He's Just Not That Into You, as well as multiple episodes of The Office USA and Malcolm in the Middle, and stars Hollywood acting legends Robert Redford, Nick Nolte, and Emma Thompson, as well as Kristen Schaal, Nick Offerman, and Mary Steenburgen. The story of A Walk in the Woods, which one can only perfectly describe as planes, trains, and automobiles meets Grumpy Old Men, and was also originally going to be a big screen reunion of sorts for Robert Redford, with his Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid co-star Paul Newman, before the latter's sad death back in 2008, focuses on successful British-American travel writer Bill Bryson, played by, well, who else? Robert Redford, who, after seeing some of his friends drop like flies over the years, and fearing he is going through a bit of a midlife crisis himself, decides he is going to actively do something physically fit and meaningful with his life before long. So, to the reasonably understandable yet reluctant annoyance of his British wife Catherine, played by Emma Thompson, he invites a long-lost friend named Stephen Katz, played by Nick Nolte, who is a morbidly out-of-shape, recovering alcoholic, to accompany him on an epic quest of self-discovery and ultimate reconciliation by hiking all 2,200 plus miles of the Appalachian Trail between the states of Georgia and Maine. So, now that I've recently watched this movie for the first time, here are my thoughts on A Walk in the Woods. Sorry, more like a painfully boring nothing burger walk in the woods. What a crushing disappointment. Not only is this particularly one of the weakest efforts from both Robert Redford and Nick Nolte in one's own opinion, not only is this by far one of the most disappointing films to come out in 2015, but it's also kind of one of the worst movies I've watched so far for the first time this year. What really saddens me about this movie, though, is that The potential was there, both for this movie to be okay at best, and to see how the chemistry between these two living Hollywood legends, Redford and Nolte, was going to turn out. But what we unfortunately get here instead is nothing more than an extended hour-and-a-half long episode of a sitcom with jokes that fall painfully flat, is painfully written, blandly acted, weakly directed, and above all feels more like 3 hours instead of the actual hour-and-a-half long runtime, due to how frankly terrible the pacing is. Now, I know it sounds like I kind of hate this movie, and, well, indeed I do in a way. And especially granted the book itself doesn't really seem to be my personal cup of tea anyway. There are actually at least 1.5 things I legit like about the movie. Firstly, the Appalachian Trail itself, which almost serves as a third main character in the movie, is of course unbelievably stunning to look at. And secondly, the soundtrack is not too bad. Not the greatest soundtrack in the world, but also certainly not quite the worst either. But sadly, apart from those two things I just mentioned, everything else about A Walk in the Woods kind of sucks, unfortunately. Almost every single one of these performers are clearly either criminally underutilized or cruising through the motions. As much as I really like and obviously hugely respect Robert Redford as an actor, and as much as it is really hard for me to deny that his innate natural charm, charisma, and likability never once fails to light up the screen every time you see him, I'm not afraid to be honest here when I say that he kind of feels terribly miscast as Bill Bryson in this film. I mean, sure, he nails the trademark dry humour that Bryson is best known for from the way he writes his books. Don't get me wrong on that. But it's rather his portrayal of Bryson in this film as this slightly curmudgeonly, overly naive and reckless, subtly rude and kind of unpleasant, unlikable arsehole that at times rubs me off the wrong way a bit. And yes, you can maybe make the legit argument that this is mostly accurate to who Bryson actually is in real life. Who knows? But otherwise, it's largely the writing that does Redford a terrible disservice here and just frankly fails to do Bill Bryson's character justice on almost all levels. Plus, there's the obvious fact that Redford is simply just 30 plus years too old for this role, since Bryson was actually in his mid-40s when he attempted this hike in the first place. And yet Redford was in his 70s when he made this movie. Also, his chemistry with Nick Nolte in this film is barely passable at best. Speaking of Nick Nolte, his performance as Stephen Katz in this movie is kind of bad. Not the actor's fault though, however, but again, it's the writing that does arguably even more of a disservice to his talents. I mean, granted, obviously, due to his years of alcoholism, that he sounds horrible nowadays compared to how he was in the 80s and 90s, with roles in Prince of Tides and even Cape Fear, the Scorsese remake with Robert De Niro. And granted, both he and Redford previously worked together a few years prior to this on The Company You Keep, one just still cannot help but feel bad for the guy in this film, because it's so blatantly damn obvious and apparent that Nolte was only stepping into a role that was originally written with Paul Newman in mind. And briefly speaking of which, by the way, of course it really sucks that Newman's lung cancer at the time had to cruelly deprive us of that potential third team-up with Redford we otherwise could have gotten. I can really only honestly compare this situation to when Richard Harris died after completing Chamber of Secrets, thus then promptly allowing Michael Gambon to step in as Dumbledore for Prisoner of Azkaban onwards, or even when Heath Ledger died during production of the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, and Johnny Depp, Colin Farrell and Jude Law all had to step into his role. Emma Thompson is barely in this movie and is literally given little to nothing to work with. I mean, just such a fucking criminal waste of talent here. Same actually goes for Kristen Schaal, Nick Offerman, and even Mary Steenburgen, who are also barely in this movie. Especially when you watch this movie, it becomes pretty damn obvious that Ken Kwapis was just not the right person to direct this movie. And what I mean by that is that very similarly to Ladies in Lavender, for example, this movie just has absolutely nothing cinematic about it whatsoever, and instead has the look, feel, visual style and aesthetic of one of the original movies the Disney Channel produced during the late 90s, early 2000s. And in my honest opinion, of the three original directors, Barry Levinson could probably have been a much better choice. I mean, after all, he's the guy who gave us Rain Man back in 1988. A similar road trip movie of self-discovery to this that actually had something much more to say emotionally than this movie does, and that actually managed to make you care and be emotionally invested in its two main characters, largely thanks to the performances by Tom Cruise and especially Dustin Hoffman. Heck, even failing that, since this was his passion project, Robert Redford should have probably stepped in behind the camera himself. I mean, after all, he won Best Director and Picture in 1981 for Ordinary People, so he's clearly a capable, talented, and intelligent enough guy who knows what he wants, and of course knows what the hell he's doing. Which perfectly leads me to the last thing I want to talk about before I give my final thoughts here, and probably both the most frustrating and the most infuriating aspect of this film, which is the writing. I'm actually profoundly shocked to find out that Michael Lund co-wrote this script, albeit under a different pseudonym. I mean, for God's sake, this is the same guy who shortly went on after this to co-write one of the best Star Wars projects we have gotten in the last 10 years, as well as arguably one of the all-time greatest conclusions to an animated film trilogy, at least initially, and one of the greatest family dramedies of the last 2 decades, which makes me struggle all the more to understand and figure out what the hell happened here and why he would write such a terrible, lazy and subpar script that is so obviously beneath him, because I know he's written so much better than this in the past. Not to even mention there is attempts to incorporate some heavy Oscar baity moments within the script that never once come across as sincere or genuine in any meaningful way, as well as this painfully tired, embarrassing and unfunny comedy that's ripped straight out of a Happy Madison production just feel kind of comically hollow and desperate. Good Christ. Alright, let's just get this over and done with so that I can just move on and not have to think about this thing ever again. In conclusion, A Walk in the Woods is a painfully forgettable, painfully embarrassing, painfully boring, painfully unfunny, and painfully dull nothing burger of a film. Perhaps aside from an okay soundtrack and some gorgeously photographed postcard shots of the Appalachian Trail, there is almost nothing to remotely enjoy or remember about this film whatsoever, nor even really anything to make you remotely give a shit or care about wanting to rewatch it more than once. I suppose it's perfectly fine if you want to check out this movie with your grandparents, but otherwise I'd recommend that you skip this movie. Watch something much more worthy of your time, like Rain Man or Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or even just go and have much more enjoyment from reading one of Bill Bryson's non-fiction books, like this one, A Short History of Nearly Everything. And with all that being said, it really pains me to give A Walk in the Woods an overall rating of 2 out of 10. Don't forget to do the following few things as always. Leave a comment below, let me know your thoughts on A Walk in the Woods, subscribe to my channel, click on the little bell to receive any emailed notifications and or updates from my channel. If you haven't already, you can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd and Blue Sky. Do take care, everyone, and bye.